Good morning, everyone. I'm Pam Heidel, Project Director for Home Improvement Research Institute. Today, Todd Tomalek, Senior Vice President of Research at John Burns Real Estate Consulting, will present the future of smart home technology and tell us how builders are utilizing smart home products in their homes. John Burns Consulting is one of HURI's preferred partners and is sponsoring breakfast at HURI's 2018 Insights Conference. If you have not already registered, do not miss this event. We have pulled together many of the top industry experts to present where the home improvement market is headed. Registration ends on September 3rd, and for those listening to our webinar today, you can save $100 off registration by using the discount code SMARTHOME. An email will be sent out to all registrants, providing a link where today's presentation and recording can be accessed on HURI's website. I've also uploaded a PDF of the presentation in the handouts section. Due to the number of people on the line today, you are in listen-only mode. Please use the chat or question function to submit questions. All questions will be monitored and answered at the end of the presentation. You may also email HURI staff or Todd with any questions you have later. Let's get started. Welcome, Todd.
All right, thank you, Pam. Appreciate the introduction, and great to be speaking again with the HURI group. Always a treat to be in front of an esteemed group, and we know that a lot of the key players in the space are members of HURI, so congrats to you. Just sharing a couple things regarding our presentation today. So if you haven't heard of John Burns, which I imagine many of you have, but let me give you a little bit of a background about what we try to do. One of our primary objectives in all of our analysis is to make sure that we're not missing anything. And so that obviously includes our forecasts, but also any thought that we have around features of the home, big amenities that buyers are paying for, and absolutely includes smart homes. So just to give you a perspective of what that might look like, on the right is a distribution of just who our current research subscribers look like. So obviously we have a lot of home builders that we work with. In a typical year, we do about 600 to 700 custom consulting studies, usually with home builders, where they're looking in market by market, trying to figure out what type of homes they're building and what type of products to put in and what buyers will and won't pay for. So we definitely work with the builders. But then also we value tremendously feedback that we get from all the other players in the space that touch housing. So as you can see on the right, we have exposure to building product companies that we work with, a lot of investors, private equity funds that are putting long-term seed money, trying to churn around businesses and coming up with new strategies, stock and mod funds, land developers that are trying to choose what type of homes that they're going to develop land for, what size of lots, and what type of communities. So all sorts of companies that are involved in the housing space, we like to interact with. And that's helped us make some pretty good calls, not because necessarily we are so smart and we pick up on everything that they don't, but because if you have a lot of smart people in the room, then you learn something. So just a few examples. Early in 2007, our connections with Wall Street helped us get super bearish because we found out what was going on with credit default swaps and what was happening in some of the broader leverage in that space. That helped us call it right there. On the private equity side, earlier in 2012, we had a really good sense that the market was beginning to turn positive because we saw all these private equity funds. We tend to get involved in the underwriting for some of the deals that touch that space. We saw all these private equity funds go and scoop up all these distressed single-family rental properties, or single-family properties that they converted to rental units. So we knew that the excess supply of homes was disappearing. So that let us get an idea of what was happening there. More specifically on building products and features in the home, every month we're in contact with a lot of the major builders. 18 of the top 20 builders work with us every month. In addition, we have a monthly survey that we're asking builders every single month, and it's huge. It roughly captures about 20% of all new home sales every single month, and they're telling us about what's going on by price point of home and sales and starts and communities and things like that. But then that also lets us ask home builders about shifts that's happening in new construction trends. So that includes smart homes, the type of features that they're offering and what type of adoption is happening there. Also includes things like panelized construction or other things that are relevant. I remember a couple of years ago we saw Houston. We heard color from right from the ground that the market was pivoting between price points, between higher price points were slowing down, but lower price points are doing fine. That obviously matters for categories like this, where there may be a different amount of dollars that are chasing a start. So that helps us get that information right. And then we also are very thoughtful about serving the home buyers. I'll talk more about this later, but we survey tens of thousands of home shoppers to learn what types of products and features that they value the most, what they're willing to pay for, and I'll share some of the insights we had there for smart home features too. But I guess my key takeaway in showing you this is that if there's something that we're missing, that I'm talking about that you disagree with me on, or you think that it's something that should be on our radar that we're not seeing, please let me know. Shoot me a note. We want to know, because we're most focused on making sure that we're getting our thoughts right. And we also want to make sure that there's some trend that if there's something out there that we're not aware of, we want to know. So with that said, we're going to dive into three major categories in this presentation. First, we're going to talk about just the overview of how we think about smart products. And then we're going to go specifically into new homes to show you some of the survey work that what we've learned about smart products that are going in those homes, some of the products, what they look like, and then some of the adoption that's happening both by builders and by consumers who are shopping those builders. And then just a little bit of a pivot to talk about what we see happening now in the smart home space in general. Obviously, that's a category that's evolved a lot over the past few years. We think it's just getting going. And so I'll outline what that looks like. The three big takeaways that you should come away with is that there is tremendous interest in smart home technology, particularly from the buyer side, meaning a lot of consumers that are shopping for homes today, outsized amount are telling us they're willing to write the check to pay more for smart features. That being said, there are some really significant differences by demographic in terms of what type of products they're willing to pay for and what they're not willing to pay for. And it definitely does not exclude older buyers. One thing we learned is that they're very interested in safety and security features, and that is the number one buyer for safety and security features for smart products, interestingly. And then, this is something, number three, that hasn't been talked about enough, but I think is extremely relevant and will become much more part of the story for smart products over the next decade or so. And that's that there's a shift in business model that happens as smart products become adopted. So if we think about smart TVs, the advent of smart TVs didn't drive more TV purchases. Sometimes we, as building product manufacturers, we like to think about, well, what drives a higher attachment rate, or what drives, more purchases in the home. But really the opportunity is for a business shift from delivering goods by building products to delivering a package of services or experiences. So the easy analogy there is to think through that smart TVs enable the existence of a business like Netflix. But then once we extrapolate that out to all the new smart products that are going in the home, it's the connected services and the other ancillary experiences that go to that that'll be a real interesting opportunity. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's happening, what's changing there, that might give you some food for thought. So with that being said, perhaps you've seen this announcement from Lennar. So Lennar, with their recent merger with CalAtlantic, is the nation's largest home builder. I think generally viewed as one of the more sophisticated builders out there. They made a pretty startling announcement when they announced that in their Everything's Included package, which essentially what the Everything's Included package is, unlike some builders that let their buyers customize everything in the home, Lennar takes a whole bunch of really nice amenities and includes it and says everyone's going to get these products and these features. So as part of that bundle that every single buyer would get, they've included what they term as their smart home. And a big part of that is just this Wi-Fi certification, that there's no dead spots in the home. But there's also a number of additional products, including security features, other connected things. Amazon's incorporated throughout the home, and I'll talk more about that later. But the key takeaway is that a large number one market share publicly traded builder that's using public capital that can't waste money has made the strategic choice to pivot to focus on smart products that matters. And so I think what's happening now is that we're finally reaching a point where some of the technology that is enabling smart homes is finally catching up with some of the concepts that were flushed out 50 to 100 years ago. This is just a couple examples. You know, the smart home concept is not new. Here in the 60s, there was this film, maybe you've seen this, called 1999 AD, and it was sponsored by Buckle Ford, which is an appliance company. And if you get a chance to YouTube this film, it's definitely worth your time, because you see this whole interaction of this family interacting with a computer. Of course, that was the time that computers were kind of becoming a thing. But interacting with the computer to think about their day-to-day decisions. So there was a child that the computer was helping him do his schoolwork and teach him. In the photo below, there you see one of the family members, it looks like the wife, consulting the computer because the husband wanted a certain lunch, and the computer's intervening and saying, nope, can't do that because that's going to be 400 calories over your limit, and suggesting a different menu. So the concept of smart technology intervening and guiding homeowners to make different types of decisions was around 50 years ago. There was this Echo 4 home automation machine, which was completely impractical. It was enormous. But the idea was it would control the temperature, it would control the lights, it might make shopping lists, it had a bunch of other tasks, it would even play music. It's really not that different than what the Amazon products are today. It was just the tech today has caught up with what the concept was from 50 years ago. Samsung recently came out with a new SmartThings package. Perhaps you've seen it. It's pretty recent. That essentially does everything that the Echo 4 proposed to do in the 60s. Probably does it a little bit better, and it's very seamless and clean. One of the trends we notice with today's technology for smart homes too is that all the features are pretty easily retrofit into older homes, and we think that's going to probably boost adoption. Just a couple other thoughts, and then we'll move forward. 100 years ago, there was discussion around universal appliances. That was a company that manufactured appliances. Their tagline was spring cleaning with electricity. And then in the late 30s, there was this Popular Mechanics article that talked about the electric home of the future. And the whole concept of this home was that this was a home that would alert you to when the news happened wirelessly. It would deliver photos of the news as it occurred in real time. And of course, we know that the technology exists today, both from the internet itself, but also from Alexa and some of the other products that we're going to talk about to cause those things to happen. And I had to mention Roomba, because that was the modern day equivalent of the appliance company's ad from 100 years ago. So let me just pause there and give some color on how we tend to think about technology adoption. And if you've studied the space at all, you've definitely seen, you know, the S curve, the adoption rate curve. Generally how we term up appliance adoption is to think about that 20 percentile of households to 80 percentile adoption, meaning that if 20% of households have a product in their home, and the growth rate from that point to not quite saturation, the most rapid acceleration tends to happen between that and 80%. So as an example, in 1982, about 20% of households had a microwave. Over the next 10 years, we saw that grow to about 80%. Now, that's just a monster growth rate. Today, it's about 95%. I don't think any one of us are talking about, did you hear those neighbors across the street that bought their microwave? Because we're all used to the idea, you know, we've become accustomed to it. But once you get to the bottom part of that growth curve, that 20 percentile of technology adoption, the opportunity for growth really seems to take off. And if we look at how long that takes for growth, it kind of gives us an interesting perspective on where we are for smart homes. So if we think about smart speakers, which is kind of the hub of a lot of aspects around the home, that's what's being used in those Lennar homes, adoption today is around 20%. Smartphones are just reaching that 80 percentile rank, which if you're like me, most people you know probably use a smartphone. So that difference in how frequent households use it and how comfortable you might be with that technology happens relatively quickly once you get to that part of the S-curve. For context, Netflix is about 52%. So about half of those households in the U.S. currently subscribe to Netflix. Obviously, none of us would debate that that's a viable business model. It's a super important business model, but that was enabled because of the adoption of the other smart technologies. And just to give some rough numbers for the math folks in the room, I think it's worth just putting this in front of you. If we take that S-curve, that adoption curve, and we just look at some of the other technologies of how long it's taken them to go from 20% of households that had that installed in their home to 80%, there's kind of a general theme here. Microwaves took about 10 years. Mobile phones took about 11 years. About a 15-year adoption curve from that 20% to 80% for the internet per household. And we're not there for tablets yet at 80%, but based on where we are so far, if we keep the current pace, we'll be at 80% adoption for tablets in 12 years. So of those four, we might observe that the average adoption from 20% adoption rate to 80% adoption rate, the average length of time takes about 12 years. If we apply that math to today's smart home speakers, it means about 6 million smart homes need to either be built or retrofitted. So if you take every housing start and about 80% of all existing home sales, if those incorporated a smart home, that would get you to 80% adoption by the end of year 12. That's roughly a 12% compound growth rate over the next decade. So that's very positive from a growth standpoint. We're very bullish on that space in general. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what we're seeing happening in new construction. So we do the survey, as I mentioned, of home builders, asking about their operations, what type of products they're building, what type of homes they're building. And a lot of times we're working with the builders themselves on the ground, so we have pretty good visibility to changes in mix. One of the things that jumped out to me here was last year when we asked, tell us builders about your offerings of smart technology. About half the builders came back and said, yep, we're offering homes that we offer some sort of smart technology. And I'll give you the overview of what those features were. But for the most part, for these builders right now, that means probably no dead spots for Wi-Fi, some sort of thermostat control. You're dealing with some sort of lighting control, and maybe they have some garage control in there too. There's also some really excellent products from the plumbing manufacturers that I'll talk about later. But I don't know that most of the builders are viewing that as part of their current package of smart technology. It's definitely different by location. And then what probably also jumps out to you on this graph, it certainly did to me, was just how widely varied by region the offerings are for smart technology. We've seen this happen with other building products trends, you might even think of like luxury features, style features. If you looked at, different types of kitchen designs and countertops and different types of products, they tend to be a regional thing first, usually at the higher price point, and then it later on spreads through a more wider variety of price points. So in Florida, on the West Coast, Southern California, Northern California, almost 80% of all builders are offering some sort of smart technology. On the opposite end of the spectrum in the Northeast and the Southeast, it's just getting started, between 20 and 30%. So this is probably something that we think is changing pretty rapidly right now, where the vast majority of builders will be at least offering some sort of smart technology. The individual packages will look quite a bit different from builder to builder, and we think that's going to probably get pretty standard by the time we get to the end of 10 to 12 years of adoption. One thing that jumped out to me when we asked builders about how many of their homes they were offering smart technology was that, so 53% of the builders offered smart technology, and 42% of the homes they delivered were delivered with smart technology. So just taking those two ratios, that implies that from the end consumer standpoint, that when we actually put the opportunity in front of them of, we're offering you a home with a smart feature, do you want to write the check for the additional amount? Almost 80% of the time, they elected to go ahead and include at least some aspects of those smart features. That's super encouraging considering how early stage we are in terms of adopting those different smart features in the home across the general population. Most existing homes don't have that type of technology. but the fact that we're seeing an 80% upsell rate is super positive. Builders respond to that type of thing very well. They're looking to adjust any aspect of their community, any design, any floor plan, layout to get an additional upgrade to push any price where they can. This is something that will get traction and get noticed by the builders pretty easily, especially because it's such a low-cost install item. They don't have to, redesign the trusses or redesign the floor plan to go back to the board or to the zoning to get any type of approval to do that. This is an easy upgrade. Okay, so now we're just going to pivot a little bit to focus on what some of these features in the new homes actually look like. And to do that, I think it's worth giving you some color on, in addition to working closely with the suppliers, with the builders, we absolutely know that the only way you really ever get the right answer is to work with, their customers, which are the new home shoppers. So this is a very typical type study that we do. We just completed one at the end of last year where we surveyed almost 24,000 new home shoppers. And this is important because this isn't, a general random population sample of 24,000 people. These are active shoppers who are in the process of buying a home. So they've walked into the builder sales office, to give them their name, maybe they've registered online, maybe they're in the process of configuring their home. Maybe you think of the Tesla, of once you put the deposit down, you put a bigger deposit down to configure the Tesla, that's a serious buyer. That's really what we're talking about here for new home shoppers. So we've got a super high quality sample of new home shoppers. And then what we did, we're also very sensitive, in the interest of getting our answer right, we're very sensitive to making sure that we don't fatigue these shoppers with way too many questions. So here's what we do. We take these shoppers and we put them essentially through 4 different survey modules. We get all the base questions out front done. So we learn about their demographics and what type of home they're currently living in and why they're shopping. Maybe they're having a baby, or maybe they're in retirement and they're moving closer. We learn all those things. And then we ask them more details about the home. And they have the option to take multiple modules if they want to. Some home shoppers are really interested in their process. They're obviously highly engaged. So they definitely have the option to take multiple modules, but we don't force them to. The idea is where we're getting data on detailed features and products in the home, we want really high quality voluntary responses. So for the first module, we ask them about different choices and pricings of the home. Then we spend some time thinking about the lot preferences and the configuration. So if you're a developer and you're trying to think if you should have a larger lot or a smaller lot, we want to make sure we get that answer right before we even start thinking about what the home's going to look like or the products in it. Then we had almost 17,000 people go through the product design, which means all the different features and fit and finish that you put in a new home. Think about the floor plan, the types of designs that you'd prefer. Maybe it's modern or Mediterranean or something like that. And also questions at the product level, like would you prefer this brand of faucet versus that brand? And more specifically, would you pay more? That's one of the keys that we're trying to get at is just like you would upgrade, if you're buying a new car and you're upgrading the seats from a certain material towards like leather seats, we want to get to the sense of whether or not these buyers would write an additional check to pay a premium for these upgrade features. So the 4th module was interesting because this was the module that was focused on smart homes and tech and communication. So all the different types of amenities that we're talking about, Lennar thinking about, are the type of things that we wanted to get our heads around here. And then we also asked about some of the more shopping habit and website specific questions too. So we wanted to get an idea of, are these people really using realtors? Are they using Zillow? Because obviously that changes how the builders pursue their marketing strategy. So here's some of the high-level products that we're seeing traction in. You're probably familiar with some of them, but I'm going to give you some overview of the products and then some numbers. So you at least have some back-of-the-envelope reference of what consumers are telling us and builders that they're willing to do here. So if you haven't seen any other smart products in the home, you've probably been exposed to a smart thermostat at some point. The Nest thermostat in the bottom right-hand corner is one of the more popular ones. Obviously, it's created by Google. What's interesting here, so the common thread is that these are thermostats that control the heating and cooling of your home, but they can be connected to by your smart device. And in many cases, they also have some sort of learning feature where if you're going to be gone, they might adapt on their own the temp of the home to save money or to change whatever your preferences might be at that time. So it's much more intelligent or interactive than your basic thermostat. So the reason that that's interesting, and the reason I'm showing that to you first, is let me show that to you this way. So when you think about your kitchen, if you're buying a new home, in many instances, the kitchen is one of the kind of the traditional spaces of the home that people are willing to invest. So when we ask our new home buyers in the layout section, that layout module, what you're willing to pay for, we get almost 70% of these active shoppers say, yes, absolutely, it's important for us to get an oversized kitchen, to invest extra to make sure that features the way we want. And intuitively, that makes sense because we know the kitchen has become such a central part of the home. When I think of Chip and Joanna Gaines, every remodel show that we see them do, one of the first things that happens is, well, the big walls come down and we open up the kitchen and now you have this big oversized kitchen. So that feature in the home as kind of a fixture in cultural acceptance and adoption is pretty standard. And that's at 67% of buyers saying, yes, I want to pay more for that. So in comparison, 60% of new home shoppers tell us that it's definitely worth them writing an extra check to upgrade to the remote controlled thermostat, the Nest type product. That's very promising. To us, that basically is that is a signal that we're going to see adoption continue to grow, probably on its way up to the 80th percentile. Now, what jumps out too is when we look at that question that we ask of home builders, how often those products are being offered. Only 58% of builders were offering some sort of smart heating and cooling management. And what we heard from some of the builders was, that some of these products, it's almost easy because they're so easy to retrofit, that they would build the home and then maybe connect them with someone else who would install that for them. We think that more builders will probably do something along the lines of what Lennar's doing, where it's just included in the home. But that's worth mentioning, that 60% is a very strong number for that type of feature. Another important feature of the home, and you might be familiar with this too, is some of the advances that have happened around security. So there's several companies that manufacture smart locks. And the general concept is, this is a lock that in addition to, it's not just a keypad, but it allows you to identify who's coming into the home, automatically lock the door, under different situations. If you're leaving, you don't have to wonder if you left it. If you're gone on vacation and you're wondering if someone fed your cat, you can set this up so that it will alert you to let you know that, the person whose phone you authorized to come feed your cat has entered your home and then they left. So you can even, little peace of mind things along those lines is what the service that smart lock offers. And there's many more. In addition to that lock grouping, we tend to think about the cameras like the Nest Cam or some of the indoor-outdoor products that are motion activated in the same general grouping from a home tech standpoint. We're meaning that smart technology that's focused on safety and security of their home is kind of its own product. And I'll explain in a little bit why we think that's the case. But here's the numbers that we're seeing on that. So remember before I said 60% of all home buyers that were interested in upgrading and putting in a smart thermostat. Here's how it looks for the security features. So that exterior security camera, which is the camera that typically automatically takes a photo of you or a video of you and remotely will send it to you from your smartphone as you approach someone's home, that's the same number. That surprised me. I expected that to be lower than the thermostat. Wasn't the case. Consumers were just as willing to write an additional premium to get that product. Keyless entry was higher, 63%. Wireless security system, something that incorporated other types of elements in the home, where if someone enters in the home unexpectedly, it lets you know, perhaps even alerting you on your smartphone while you're away. Almost 3/4 of all buyers are willing to pay extra for that. Now, the reason that is interesting to me is because definitely builders are not offering it at the same pace. So builders will see this, they will know this, and they will increase their offering of how likely they are to include these features in the home. So we think you're going to see new homes definitely include a lot more of these features, which is what we're seeing happening with Lennar right now. Let's talk about lighting briefly. So this is probably one of those categories that's one of the most easy retrofit applications. You can literally buy a bulb, or in some cases some other control modules that let you customize the look and the feel and the vibe, person to person. Evening lighting can be set up differently from a midday or from a breakfast. It can be done differently from room to room. So there's a lot of interesting customization that's available in that piece. What jumps out to us here is that 54% is still a huge number. Like 54% is a big number for any product. This is just a general confirmation that smart products, that people who are in the process of buying a new home are absolutely interested in all of that. That's a category that they're willing to think seriously about and look at. What jumps out to me here too is that 54% of buyers said they're interested in paying extra for smart lighting controls. Only 37% of the builders were currently offering that. So that's a spread that will correct itself, and that will happen by builders increasing the amount of offering that they have to include those type of lighting products. Super encouraging. That's a sign of increased adoption in the future. So I'm not going to go through category by category all of these, but it is worth mentioning. Let's talk about garage doors. The concept here isn't that much different than what we saw for security. The idea is that you can remotely operate your garage door. You can see what's going on there. And if you're away, or if you're driving up to your home, or someone else is driving up to your home, all the same convenience and security features that come with your front door can now be extended to your garage door. Also, there's some pretty interesting plumbing systems. It's striking when you see companies like Kohler or Moen or some of these other ones choose to send teams not just to the Builder Show or to KBIS, but also to the Consumer Electronics Show. That means that those type of companies are taking a serious look and investment at the space of smart products. And what we mean for some of the showering categories, here's an example here illustrated. We're here through the Alexa or through the Amazon product. It's all integrated. And the idea is you can preheat your shower. So in this case, you can conceivably sip your coffee and enjoy your lounge chair and say, please, turn on my shower to 103 degrees. And without ever having to leave your seat, that gets done ahead of time. There's some other interesting applications to think about here from the standpoint of dealing with those who maybe could harm themselves, meaning that you don't have to worry about your children burning themselves or maybe older ones. It's just ease of use. There are protections and safeguards by using digital products because it lets you set up the controls and parameters to what you're comfortable your users using the products for. So there's probably some additional applications for some of the smart showering products to even go towards older residents, those with families. In fact, in just a minute, we actually think that the smart showering trend is especially interesting for young families, maybe even irrespective of income growth. Usually you see adoption happen for smart products increase as wages go up because you can afford to buy more of these things. But we see some real interesting consumer preference differences by demographic. Here's just one example. So before putting all these consumers through our survey, we want to get a sense of just where they are in life by life stage. So we divide them into 9 different life stages. So for instance, if you're young and you are a couple, but you don't have children, well, then they might make different types of purchase decisions than those who do have children. And similarly, some families, what you see in front of you here is that each one of those groups that are listed on the left, we ask them, well, why are you even in the shopping process? I mean, it is disruptive to go buy a new home, to go configure a new home, to pack up all your things. What's causing you to go do that? And one of the things that we find out is that, especially for first-time home buyers, that marriage, family, having a growing family, which often means a baby on the way, that is the impetus for them going and shopping at homes. It has some real interesting implications for home ownership rate too and household formation, because there's been this long time debate about, well, is this younger cohort of incoming millennials, are they going to buy homes or not? And our view has generally been, well, yeah, because it's tied towards, you know, these major life events like marriage and having children, which are generally delayed, but not removed. So the reason I show this to you is I just want to give you an example of how important it is to really, if you're a building products manufacturer that are thinking about making smart products, to really, really know your end market, particularly know the demographic segments that you're marketing to. So here's two that I'll call out. Here's the young couple and the young family. Now, the only difference between these groups, they roughly are earning the same amount. I'll show you a couple things on them in a moment. But the only difference is that the young family has kids. Their ages are roughly the same. Here's what we know about this group. So if we look at our 9 different life stage segments, you've got some segments where they have no children, some of them where it's just a single person, some of them where they're empty nesters. They tend to buy smart products very differently. And there's a whole lot more we can talk about on this, but I'm just going to show you a couple things. So that youngest group that does not have children, the top 2 boxes, that's the number 1 group for the smart thermostat, which is kind of interesting. Now, it's an easy retrofit, and it's something that you can kind of quickly put onto your home, so that's good to know. But even of the new home shoppers, that's the group that's the most likely to shell out additional cash for that product. In contrast, the group at the bottom, the mature singles, these are people whose kids have moved out of the home, they're over 45 plus, or maybe even beyond that, where they retired and they're in the active adult stage. That's the term that builders typically use to think about the communities that they target for retirees, and they have totally different features, totally different community layouts. Let me show you what tech features that group tends to be the number 1 segment in. That is the smart lock segment, which includes all the other cameras and the other safety, security, technology. This is the group that's willing to pay more for those features. This is interesting because I think there's sometimes a general comment that gets made about smart technology, that it's a young buyer thing. And definitely, when we look at all the data, there is a bias in general towards technology, towards younger buyers, but not if you're smart locks. Not if you're, for some of these categories, even though younger buyers are not opposed to buying smart locks. It's just that these older buyers are that much more willing to write additional checks above and beyond the younger buyers for those categories. So if you're manufacturing these type of categories, it's definitely important to know which group you're marketing to. Interestingly, and these look different even within some of these subgroups, but if you have a family, if you have children, that's the group that tends to be the number 1 segment for those smart garages, which is surprising too, because they tend to, you kind of operationally think about those are very similar to the smart locks or some of the cameras. Not so in terms of who's most willing to shell out cash for those products. Here's one other thought that I just think is worth mentioning. So we talked about those plumbing products, some of the smart shower products. Now, how you'd use that, why you'd use that is probably a very different decision than some of the other products like the lock. But I want to show you just why we think that some of these products are so interesting and why it's so important to make sure you really know your demographic segments well when you're thinking about how they adopt tech. When we compare those 2 younger categories, so the young couple that doesn't have kids that are buying new homes versus the young couple that maybe they just have kids and now they're also buying new homes, notice what happens in employment for those 2 categories. So on the left here, we have these young couples. They don't have kids. 82% of those couples, both spouses or both people in the household work full time. Okay, so there's a lot of income going on there. Once we add children to the mix, what changes is that now these young families drop down in terms of the percentage of them that work full time. So what happens in some of these cases is one may choose to step back. Maybe they're with the child, maybe they're kind of sharing duties, but Generally, we would view income, knowing nothing else, without changing anything else, we'd probably say that between these two groups, the young family is choosing to have less income to spend more time with their children. So the reason that matters is when we look at what type of homes, think about buying a new car, the type of products and features and configurations that one person might choose is different than another. And similarly, when we have people configure what type of products and features they want in their new home, we see differences emerge among very similar groups that are just in a different life stage. So comparing those young families that don't have children to the families that do have children, here's one big one. So here we have just the configuration of how many bedrooms and bathrooms that they want in their home. So shoppers without children are roughly evenly split between whether or not they want 2 bathrooms, that's on the far right-hand corner, or 3 bathrooms. About 46% say they want 2, about 43% say they want 3. Once you add children to the mix, look what happens next. Now bear in mind, these are households who one member has in some cases chosen not to continue working. Maybe they've stepped back in how much they're working to earn less, to spend more time with their family. The big change here is that those shoppers with children absolutely want more bathrooms. The percentage of households that want just 2 bathrooms goes all the way down to 21%. It was the number 1 category for those without children. It goes down to the lowest among 2, 3, and 4 bathroom households. And then a whole lot more want even 4 bathrooms. So this tells us that they're willing to pay extra for that type of feature within the home. It means they have to sacrifice something else design-wise. And interestingly, too, when we follow up with that group with children, what we learned is that 62% of that group will pay an additional extra $2,000 for a separate bathtub to be installed instead of a tub shower combo. So if you're a home builder and you're looking at the smart tech space, even how you might approach marketing the smart bathroom technology as opposed to the smart lock technology, you probably approach that discussion so much differently with those who are having with children designing their bathrooms versus just having a general smart home. Tell us what smart home features do you want? Check the box. Do you want lighting? Do you want bathroom? Do you want garage? So we're seeing that some of the potential for these categories is going to be really, really different by life stage. This makes us pretty positive on the smart bathing technology too. Okay, so just shifting gears for a moment, we've kind of given an overview of what's happened so far, an idea of some of the products that are available right now and some of the general preference rates that our shoppers are telling us they're willing to place on those products. But we see some pretty big changes ahead, especially as we move up that adoption curve over the next 10 years. So I think it's worth spending a little bit of time. And I think that conversation has to start with these personal assistants, with the Echo. So every one of those Lennar homes that we talked about at the beginning, every one of those has Amazon products throughout the home. And if you haven't had the opportunity to experiment with one of those smart speakers or one of those interactive personal assistants, here at the top of the screen, you have an idea of what you can do. So from the comfort of your home, you can basically give a command and say, Alexa, set the temp to 65 or 68 degrees, dim the living room lights, and play a movie. You can do that, and it will do all of the above, handle the above. It's kind of becoming a hub, bringing different types of technologies together. You can also tell it to preheat your shower if you need it to do. So the reason that we're talking about the Amazon and Google and Microsoft products here, first of all, none of these companies are traditional building product manufacturers. There's lots of building product manufacturers that have been around the home, especially in their space in the home for a long time. All the 3 companies below are different companies that haven't been in that space. And the reason it matters is because when we take a step back and look at the iPhone and we think about how the iPhone has become just such a central part of a lot of our lives, and I don't mean just the iPhone in general, but smartphones, I think this is a thoughtful quote that's worth thinking about. Remember that when 2007 came around and the iPhone first came out, that there were critics that pointed to the iPhone and said, hold on, that's really not a smartphone when we compare it with other smartphones. And the reason that it's not a smartphone is because the original version of the iPhone only allowed Apple software to be installed. So if you were a third-party developer, that really wasn't something that was incorporated into the iPhone. That changed in March 6th of 2008 when Apple pivoted their strategy and they opened the iPhone to all these third-party developers. So the original iPhone pitch, if you watch Steve Jobs talk about it, was that this is a phone, it's a computer, and it's basically a replacement for the iPods. It's a way for you to play music. What opening up that product to third-party developers did was gave this universe of inventors the ability to come up with new and different and original ways for people to incorporate that technology into their life, way beyond phone calls and email and music. There are all sorts of things that you can use the phone for that was never in part of the original pitch for why you should have a smartphone. So the reason I bring that up is when we compare any of the big tech providers of other technology, let's pick on smartphones. One of the attributes that you would look towards to figure out who wins and who loses was just the amount of those third-party apps that are available. Essentially, this is a measure of how customizable to your life some of these products are. So Apple, as of right now, has 2 million ways that you can incorporate that into your home, 2 million apps. Google's got almost 3.8 million. Windows has got significantly fewer, almost 700,000. BlackBerry's pretty much out of the game. I think they closed their app store, but they were at 234,000. If we didn't know any other financial numbers, if you had never seen any of these devices in your life, you could look at this chart and you have a pretty good idea as far as who was winning and who was generally losing. So at the very top of this chart is an interesting metric that I included that I think we need to be thinking about, particularly in the building product universe, and that is the number of Amazon Alexa skills. So skills is kind of the equivalent of an app. It's another ability for that Alexa to do something for you. So a recent skill was, teach me a new word today. Well, that's an app. That's a skill. Now you can incorporate that into your life in a different way. So right now, Amazon has about 30,000 skills that they developed for Alexa. That's roughly equal to where Apple was in 2009. So thinking back about that adoption curve, we think that absolutely the key indicator to watch there is how many new apps or skills that get invented to create these different smart features to do different types of things in our home above and beyond what the original product manufacturers kind of penciled in for them to do. Here's an interesting list that I think needs to be on everyone's mind regarding the smart home category. So this is the list from top to bottom. There's a whole bunch of things that Amazon, today you can go find this, list as the skills that they have for Alexa. So you can find, if you want something for humor or novelty, you can find that. If you want something for sports, you can find that. If you want something for weather, you can find that. But you'll see that there's a number of blue skills that are called out. These are the segments that Amazon's really investing in right now to build out that suite of apps or skills that isn't really built out today, but it's where they're going next. Health and fitness, games and trivia, food and drink, go through the list. So the reason that this is relevant is because we went through a fairly short list of what smart home features existed today, but the Amazon, the big tech companies are investing tremendously in this space. And what they're investing in is all sorts of different interactions that are outside of what some of the original building product manufacturers have thought of. So I made the comment before, thinking about Netflix, that really the way to monetize smart TVs, in addition to selling more TVs maybe at a higher price point, was the apps, the Netflix, the services. That's what's going on here by some of the big tech companies. I'll just share this and then we'll move on. But perhaps this is a CNBC article. So there's this 22-year-old guy. I don't even know if he owns a home. This is why this struck this out to me. But he's making $10,000 a month off of Amazon Alexa. And you read about what types of skills he's added. He added a skill to teach himself a new word every day. It originally started with a way to adjust his lights in his home. Remember those smart lights that we talked about earlier? That was where he started. And he's just been building out some new skills. And as those skills get downloaded and used and rated highly, Amazon writes him a check, which encourages many others to go do that. So we're really seeing the adoption and the incorporation and how smart products are used in the home change very rapidly. And we think that this is probably the most important spaces to watch, is to see what type of skills are built, and then making sure that any products that you have are built into that, meaning that the skills that come out, the more relevant your category is, maybe even allowing third-party skills to be developed with your products, probably is a pretty relevant thought to think about. So just for context, here's that same adoption curve. So smartphones today are roughly 80%. Smart speakers, that's the product we were just talking about, was roughly 20%. We think there is a lot of potential, a lot of growth. And that's probably going to be, as we see that approach where smartphones are today, thinking about how wired in our daily lives are to our smartphone, that's when we'll really get a better understanding of what smart homes become. There's a lot of potential in terms of how smart homes will interact with people. That will change between this 20% adoption rate as we approach 80% adoption rate. So here's just several takeaways in case you missed them, but these are big things that are on our minds right now in the smart home space. So when we talk to home shoppers, when we talk to home builders, and we see what they're willing to pay for and deliver, it tells us that this is definitely a space where the building product companies need to take serious. There's a lot of consumer interest in smart home technology. A 60% new home shopper adoption rate is super high, and that means that probably as a broader housing stock comment that we're on our way to, instead of a 20% adoption rate, to closer to an 80% adoption rate long term over the next decade. Second, if you're a building product manufacturer that's looking seriously at the smart product space, you need to spend some serious time and energy making sure you've really carefully done your research on what demographic segment you're chasing. Usually we don't think of sometimes the oldest retirees as our target segment. There's a whole lot of practical advantages for those products from a caring and well-being and security standpoint that we've seen older buyers being the most willing to write the check for those products. So definitely spend some time understanding demographic differences pertaining to tech products. And then also, what's going to change rapidly is the amount of skills and the amount of connections, the apps that happens within the home for smart products. And that fundamentally changes the type of business model that you have, from a model of selling more products, which is just goods, to a model of a cash stream from services. And it's up in the air, really, to see who gets those dollars. Right now, it seems like the tech companies, the Googles and Amazons, are the most poised to do that, because those are the ones who are developing all the third-party apps to connect the Alexa in all the different innovative ways to your home. But definitely, that's going to change how those products go to market and how they're used in the home. So those are the three big things. If you have any questions, here is my contact info. If I missed something, as I mentioned before, please let me know. Reach out. I want to make sure that we're continually monitoring the space well, and if there's something going on that we're not seeing, that we see it.
We'll wait a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, please enter them in the question box, and we will try to answer them. Todd, this was amazing, very, very interesting. I am definitely very connected with Echo in my house, so I definitely find that very, very interesting. Are there any questions? Oh, okay. No questions. Just a great presentation. Got a lot of those people saying it was a great presentation. They thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you, Pam.
All right, everybody. If you have any questions, please email either Todd or you can email Heary staff, and we will get your questions answered. I appreciate everybody attending. Oh, wait, there's one more question. One question. Oh, boy. Okay. To get to the 20% adoption rate, let's see. Oh, it says, do you know how long it took for these technologies to get to the 20% adoption rate?
Oh, that's a great question. It's, what's funny is that it takes much longer to get, I shouldn't say much, it takes just as long for some of those technologies to get to that 20% adoption rate as it took to get from 10 to 8 or from 20 to 80. In some cases, it took even longer. The big difference between adoption rates, we've seen adoption rates generally compress, including that 0 to 20% as today versus where they were, say, 50 years ago. A big part of that is because the new products don't take as much infrastructure to add to your home. But the general rule is it takes just as long to get from very low to 20 as from 20 to 80. And whoever that is, if you send me a note, I can get you the individual adoption. I can give you the answer to that question by category, and then you'll have that for each of the comps.
Okay. Here's another question. Why does the adoption rate differ by region?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question too. What we're seeing there is the reflection that the builders and probably the shoppers differ by region. So let's just think about where the big production home builders are, like Lennar and CalAtlantic, which we picked out on front. That's typically kind of the Smile region where there's a whole lot of activity that's happening, in the area. Probably not so much in the Northeast, and it happens that in the Northeast, that's the lowest rate. So builders are very varied in how fast they pivot to offer new products. And so I bet that if we were to go look at the same metric and look at in the aisle how many home shoppers were putting those in their home, I don't know if we'd see as large of differences, but part of that's just because the builders that are a little bit more agile are going to be quicker to include that and offer it to customers. What jumps out is that where they offer it, the customers buy. So that's super encouraging to see.
Good. Do you have anything on smart appliances? Can you talk about those?
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic. I pulled it because I didn't want to take too much time. But let me tell you so the answer is yes. What we learned about smart appliances is that they were roughly 14% is the current adoption rate, which is very low. And that's for new homes. But one thing that jumps out there to us was that where we take the youngest buyers and we have them, tell us what you're willing to pay for. And appliances is a big one to think about for builders because you can upsell a buyer with a branded appliance and get, additional revenue from the home, and maybe your costs don't go up the same amount as the appliance. What we found was that younger buyers were way less likely to spend $3,500 to upgrade to a high brand, like a high-end brand name appliance, like a Wolf or something like that. But they were the most likely of the group to spend the same amount of money, the $3,500, to make those appliances smart appliances. So our big takeaway was that the younger buyers are more prone to pay for features as opposed to brands, but we've definitely seen that that pivot happen specifically among that group. The oldest buyers were the least. I mean, they were just very unprone to putting those smart appliances in right now. And I think part of the issue there is that it's such an expensive outlay, and there's a little bit of worry about, if I buy this smart appliance today, I normally might expect it to last 12 years, but in 5 years, does it look clunky because the tech has advanced so much better in 5 years? But there might be a little bit of trepidation there. The more integration we see between probably the smart appliances and some of the other features, like, not to pick on the Alexa, but that type of thing, that probably could increase.
All right, we have a bunch of other questions that came in. Could you give us a few other products that are actually gaining traction other than the ones you've shown on the presentation?
So I think the ones that we talked about here from a smart standpoint are probably the primary ones. There's some really big differences between some of the other design characteristics. So here's one. If you've been out to the West Coast, you might have seen new homes that are built and they have a large sliding glass panel that essentially allows you to open up your living room to an outdoor patio, kitchen, shared space. That's a product, which is, by those glass panel manufacturers that's definitely gaining traction. We're seeing similar things happening with some of the flooring space where there's pivots between different types of flooring. We know what they'll pay for by room by flooring. But that's very esoteric and specific to the category. If there's a certain one you want to hear about, shoot me a note and I'll see what we have on it.
Well, it kind of ties in with another question about smart technology in windows and shades category. And, I've actually even seen, some where you can totally block out a window. Have you seen that picking up with builders?
That's one of those Windows seems to be one of those categories that, we've heard about that in general. I haven't seen the same data point to compare it versus prior time series, but we definitely know that that's a category that some consumers are paying more for. What I'm not sure about is the premium, what the spread looks like between, for the smart thermostat, it's a relatively low spread to upgrade your smart thermostat versus a regular thermostat. We're trying to figure out what the right premium is for those the smart windows for those features. We're not quite sure where it is yet, but that's an area for more research.
Okay. Have you looked at trends overseas, or are you really focusing on the U.S.?
So as a firm, I'll give you the long and the short answer, but as a firm, our coverage area where we spend all of our time is we want to make sure that we get the U.S. right, because it's such a big market and because most of the clients that we have and the investors that we work with focus on the U.S. Now, that said, once a year, we have a really interesting design event where we take all the key architects that are probably absolutely touching things that are overseas. We know a lot of the buyers, our headquarters is in Orange County. There's a tremendous amount of buyers that come from overseas in that area. And we know a lot of the West Coast areas too. So it's something that we need to be aware of. What we found is that we try to take the key architects and designers and then the master plan developers who are coming up with what the next best thing is going to be. And then if we can get some of the right people from the building products company and put them in a room, that's probably a very interesting conversation to have. We had one of those events last year in Denver and had a lot of success there, but I don't say that we're explicitly saying we're targeting Germany or we want to see what's going to happen, from Spain. It's more of where our customers coming from and what influences are the designers and the architects seeing and noticing.
Yeah, one of the speakers from that will be speaking at the HERE Insights conference is an architect, and they design all throughout the world. So, if you get to the conference, that would be something definitely to ask him. Okay, a couple more. You've really focused on home buyers, and that's what your survey is those that are actually buying a new home. Do you do anything or know anything on smart home adoption in existing homes?
So we've looked at,
or in the home improvement space.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time trying to think about home improvement and remodeling. I don't have that same adoption data at the existing housing stock level, but that's something that we're working on. So, stay tuned and stay in contact, and what we have, we'll share when we have it.
Okay, one other question. Wondering if there's has been any consumer interest on smart products that address air quality in addition to, temperature and things like that, like the Nest and the Ecobee.
Oh, that's whoever asked that question should get a gold star. So yeah, in fact, interestingly, we have one of the questions that we're always very thoughtful about how many questions we want to have this group go through because they do fatigue. But we included a question regarding air quality and whole home system, and the idea was let's get our arms around the smart air quality management systems, like whether or not consumers would care about that, because there definitely has been focus on other health things, and we found that there was definitely interest in the category. And I want to say the number that I saw was around 45% for air quality. It's, I think, big differences by region, and if I recall, really big differences by life stage. So I'd have to look up at that and send me a note if you want to get that. But and I think that ties to some of the questions that we learned about other health conscious questions. So for instance, some of the consumers talk about when it comes to the community layout, what their value of having a farmer's market nearby or something like that. There's a broader health story that sometimes gets left unsold or untalked about, but we definitely saw strong numbers on the air quality side. I just don't know that there's that many varied solutions that to compare between different features of air quality that we have yet. At least we've just got a couple numbers on it.
All right. There's a number of other questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to consolidate them, and what we'll do is we'll actually try to do a Q&A. We are out of time. And so what I'll do is send the questions to Todd and the person who asked it, and to make sure that all of the questions are answered. I really, really appreciate it, Todd. It was a great presentation, and it definitely is an area where it is growing both in new construction and in home improvement. Take care, everybody. Have a great lunch. Have a great week, and hope to see you at the conference.